On my wedding day, my brother tried to set my fiancé on fire. It sounds insane, but that shocking moment revealed the truth I needed to see. Instead of ruining my life, he actually saved me from a mistake I never would have escaped on my own. And for that, I truly owe him. Okay, prepare yourself because what I'm about to tell you, it's going to sound like something out of a movie. A horror movie to be exact. I mean, who gets married only to have their brother burn the altar down and attack the groom right in front of 300 screaming guests? That was my wedding. And that was just the beginning of the nightmare. I was walking down the aisle, the music swelling, about to say I do to the man I thought was my soulmate. And then in a blur my brother sprinted past me. He wasn't carrying flowers. He had a gas can. My blood ran cold as he doused the entire altar in gasoline. A sickening smell filling the air. Before anyone could even react, he lit it. Flames erupted, consuming the beautiful flowers, and then he tackled my groom straight into the burning chaos. My veil caught fire. Panic exploded. Guests stampeded towards the exits, their screams echoing through the church as my brother pinned my fiancé down amidst the flames, punching him, yelling something I couldn't hear over the sheer pandemonium. Groomsmen rushed in, wrestling my brother off, while my fiancé rolled on the ground, his hands and arms covered in terrifying second-degree burns. My mother was sobbing so hard she actually threw up on her dress. My father was roaring, accusing my brother of destroying our family. 300 guests were on their phones, screaming at 911 operators. My brother, bleeding from a nosebleed where the best man had hit him, kept fighting the 4 men holding him down, still screaming that my fiancé was trying to kill me. Everyone rushed to comfort my burned, bleeding fiancé, who was now crying. Elderly guests needed medical attention from the shock. Our sweet flower girl was just paralyzed with trauma. The priest was praying frantically over the ruined altar. Bridesmaids were openly weeping, lamenting how my brother had utterly destroyed the most important day of my life. Finally, security arrived to arrest him. As the police cuffed my brother, his voice raw from smoke inhalation, he strained to get out one last desperate plea. He looked at me, then at the officers, and he screamed, "Check the champagne he was about to give her for the toast. He's been poisoning her with mercury for months. Today's dose would have killed her before you even cut the cake." The entire church went silent. The only sound was the horrifying crackle of the fire consuming what was left of our ceremony space. My brother, knowing he had seconds before they dragged him away, kept talking, his words a frantic tumble. "Look at her hands shaking. Her hair falling out in chunks. She thinks it's wedding stress, but it's mercury poisoning from the makeup he's been switching out since March, ever since they moved in together." My own trembling hands instinctively flew to my thinning hair, which I'd been finding in clumps on my pillow every single morning. The confusion I'd been feeling, the exhaustion, the brain fog. It all suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. My brother, still fighting against the officers holding him, managed to flash his phone. He had screenshots of my fiancé asking his pharmacist friend about lethal mercury doses and how to make it look like a sudden illness. He even had receipts for mercury compounds bought online with untraceable cryptocurrency. My fiancé, still on the ground, tried to stand up, but the best man, whose grip had subtly shifted from supportive to restraining, held him back. Doubt was clearly creeping across his face. He took out a $3 million life insurance policy on her last month without telling her, my brother yelled. And their honeymoon suite already has a syringe of concentrated mercury hidden in his luggage. It would have caused complete organ failure within hours of injection. My Aunt Carol, a nurse, pushed through the stunned crowd. She walked to the champagne table, dipped her finger in my glass, and immediately recoiled. "It smells wrong," she choked out. "Like metal and chemicals mixed with the champagne." Suddenly, dozens of guests were pulling out their phones, frantically Googling mercury poisoning symptoms. They started staring at me, a dawning horror on their faces as they recognized the exact signs I'd been showing for months. Symptoms we'd all casually brushed off as wedding planning stress. My brother, despite being held, pulled up more evidence. Bank statements showing my fiancé systematically draining my savings account in small, almost undetectable increments. I'd been too confused, too sick to even notice. He was financially setting himself up for after my death. "But that's not even the worst part," my brother gasped. his voice breaking with desperation as two officers held his arms tighter. He already gave her a partial dose this morning in her breakfast smoothie, knowing it would take effect during the reception to make her death look natural. The antidote window is closing fast, because mercury binds to your organs within hours. He explained everything. He'd broken into my fiancé's apartment last night and found his journal. A chilling detailed record of every dose he'd given me for 6 months. Notes about my increasing symptoms, cold calculations for how much more I could take before dying. Even detailed plans for playing the grieving widower. My brother had gone to the police at 2 a.m., but my fiancé's uncle was the police chief. He dismissed the evidence, claiming it wasn't enough for an arrest, and then, he immediately called my fiancé to warn him. That's why my fiancé had moved up his timeline. That's why my brother realized the only way to save me was to stop the wedding, no matter what. Setting the altar on fire was the only way to ensure the ceremony couldn't continue. He knew I'd never believe him otherwise. My fiancé had spent months manipulating me, convincing me my brother was just jealous and unstable. The crowd turned as one, staring at my fiancé. His face, moments ago twisted in victimhood, had transformed. It was cold, calculating. He realized his meticulous plan was now completely exposed to 300 witnesses. 2 groomsmen instinctively grabbed his arms, but he was faster than anyone expected, adrenaline overriding the pain of his burns. The cake table was right behind him. He grabbed the decorative knife we were supposed to use for cutting our wedding cake, spinning toward me before anyone could react. His burned hand locked around my neck despite the agony it must have caused him. The blade pressed against my throat as he pulled me back against his chest, using me as a human shield. The police officers who'd been arresting my brother froze, hands on their weapons. But I was perfectly positioned as a shield. They couldn't get a clear shot. "Everyone stay exactly where you are," he said, his voice completely different now. The fake warmth I'd fallen in love with was gone, replaced by a cold, methodical tone, like he was reading from one of his pharmacy textbooks. "Or I'll finish what I started right here in front of everyone." The blade cut deeper. I felt a trickle of warmth. He started dragging me backward toward the kitchen doors while 300 people watched, frozen in shock. My brother fought against the 2 cops holding him, screaming for my fiancé to let me go. His face twisted with pure desperation. The best man, who had been holding my fiancé back, dropped his arms completely and stepped away with his hands up. He finally understood. He'd been protecting a man who was actively poisoning me. I forced myself to speak, even with the knife pressing into my skin. I told my fiancé everyone knew the truth now. Hurting me wouldn't change anything. He pulled me tighter against his burned chest. He said if he was going down anyway, he might as well finish what he started since the mercury was already working through my system. The priest moved forward, both hands raised, as if approaching a wild animal. He pleaded with my fiancé to think about his soul, about eternity. My fiancé actually laughed. A bitter, chilling sound I'd never heard from him. He said God stopped listening to him years ago when the debt started piling up, and I became his only way out. Just then a huge crack split the air as a section of the burning altar collapsed, sending a shower of sparks across the church floor. Everyone flinched, including my fiancé. It was my chance. I drove my elbow back into his burned ribs as hard as I could. I felt his grip loosen just enough for me to drop my full weight down, twisting away from the blade. The knife caught my shoulder as I fell, slicing through my dress and into my skin, but I kept moving, hitting the marble floor hard as my fiancé lunged after me. 3 officers tackled him before he could reach me. The knife went flying across the floor as they pinned him down, his burned hands leaving bloody prints on the white marble as he fought them. EMTs rushed over to me while the cops cuffed my fiancé, who was still screaming that I deserved this for being too stupid to notice what he'd been doing for 6 whole months. My brother, finally breaking free from the officers holding him, dropped to his knees beside me. He apologized over and over for not finding another way to save me, tears mixing with the blood still running from his nose. The EMTs pressed gauze against my shoulder wound, explaining they needed to get me to the hospital right away for something called chelation therapy to counteract the mercury poisoning. My mother collapsed into my father's arms, sobbing, and I heard my father tell my brother he'd saved my life, his voice breaking. They lifted me onto a stretcher and rushed me out, past all the wedding guests still standing there in shock, past the burning altar that was now mostly just smoking ruins, past the champagne table with my poisoned glass still sitting there. In the ambulance, an EMT named Johann started an IV in my arm, his voice calm as he explained that mercury poisoning needed immediate treatment to prevent permanent organ damage. My whole body was shaking now, not from fear, but from the poison affecting my nervous system, making my muscles twitch and jerk uncontrollably. Johann kept talking about how the treatment would help, but my vision kept blurring, and my head felt like it was full of cotton. At the emergency room, they wheeled me straight in. Johann, who was also a doctor, took over my case. He ordered blood tests immediately to confirm the mercury levels while nurses hooked me up to monitors. He explained that the chelation drugs would bind to the mercury so my body could get rid of it. We'd caught it just in time, thanks to my brother's intervention. The blood draw made me dizzy, and I could see my hands shaking worse, little tremors I couldn't control. Johann said it was normal and would get better with treatment, but recovery might take weeks, even months. My parents arrived with my Aunt Carol, who immediately started grilling Johann with medical terms I barely understood, asking about treatment protocols and recovery times. Then a woman in a dark suit walked in, flashing a state police badge. She introduced herself as Detective Nissa Lawson, explaining she was taking over the case because the local police chief had a clear conflict of interest. She meticulously wrote down everything Johann told her about my mercury levels, while my mother kept touching my arm as if to make sure I was truly there. 20 minutes later, Detective Lawson returned, carrying plastic bags containing my champagne glass and a sample from that morning's breakfast smoothie. Field tests showed crazy high levels of mercury in both. Enough to kill me if I'd consumed it all. She sealed everything for the crime lab. My brother then appeared, escorted by 2 officers, burns visible on his skin from the altar fire, his eyes swollen where the best man had hit him. Detective Lawson told the officers to take the cuffs off. My brother's actions were clearly defensive, she said. He had saved my life. They were releasing him on his own recognizance. He just stood there staring at me, pure relief washing over his bruised face. More test results came back. My mercury levels were far higher than first thought, almost at the lethal point. But the interrupted dosing meant my organs hadn't completely failed. Johann started me on aggressive chelation therapy, explaining I'd need multiple rounds over the next few months with careful monitoring. Suddenly, the police chief burst through the door, demanding to see his nephew. Detective Lawson stepped directly in front of him. "You are suspended," she stated, "pending investigation for obstruction of justice." He started yelling about lawsuits, about her lack of authority, but she held up paperwork showing the state police had taken over jurisdiction because of his involvement in covering up attempted murder. He stormed out, slamming doors as Lawson made a call to have someone follow him, ensuring he couldn't interfere further. A woman from the district attorney's office, Francine Price, arrived next. She pulled up a chair and began taking my statement, writing furiously as I recounted the past 6 months. The confusion, the shaking, thinking it was just wedding stress, and how my fiancé had always been so caring when I felt sick. Francine said she was fast-tracking charges for attempted murder in the 1st degree, poisoning, and fraud. With all the evidence and witnesses, she felt confident about getting a conviction. The wedding photographer knocked, holding a bag of memory cards. He'd captured everything, from my brother's attack to my fiancé holding the knife to my throat. Detective Lawson took them, saying the footage would be crucial for showing the jury exactly what happened, proving my brother was trying to save me. My brother's lawyer, Adam Bailey, arrived. My brother insisted he didn't want any defense claiming he was crazy. He knew exactly what he was doing and would do it again to save me. Adam pushed for a temporary insanity or necessity defense, given the imminent threat to my life, but my brother just shook his head. He'd rather go to jail than pretend he was sorry for stopping a murder. Johann returned with test results from hair samples. His face was grim. The mercury levels in my hair went back 6 months, starting small and gradually increasing, proving my fiancé had been systematically poisoning me, just like my brother said. The timeline matched the journal perfectly. Each sample showed higher concentrations, with notes corresponding to specific months. A perfect, chilling record of attempted murder. Johann said this kind of evidence was rare, because most poisoning victims don't survive long enough for such detailed testing. My brother's intervention had saved not just my life, but also preserved the proof. My hands were shaking worse now as the full reality hit me. The man I was going to marry had been slowly killing me. For half a year, calculating doses, watching me get sicker, all while pretending to care. Detective Lawson took photos of all the results. This evidence, combined with the journal, will make it impossible for your fiancé to claim innocence or accident, she promised. We're building a case that will put him away for decades, maybe life. He'll never be able to hurt you or anyone else again. The next morning, Detective Lawson called. They'd arrested the pharmacist's friend at his job, dragging him out in handcuffs as his coworkers watched in shock. He tried to run, she said, but they caught him. They'd traced all those cryptocurrency transactions and hundreds of texts between him and my fiancé discussing exact doses and how to make it look natural. My fiancé was formally charged 2 days later. Attempted murder in the first degree, poisoning, fraud, and assault with a deadly weapon for holding that knife to my throat. His lawyer tried to get bail, but the judge took one look at the evidence. No way, he declared. Not with him being a flight risk and the danger he poses to her. The courtroom was packed with reporters and even some wedding guests. My fiancé just sat there in his orange jumpsuit, his burned hands still bandaged, staring at me as if this was somehow my fault. After 5 days in the hospital, I finally went home, though I had to return every single day for more chelation treatments that left me feeling sick and weak. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I kept finding clumps of hair in the shower drain. But the doctors said these symptoms would get better with time and treatment. The insurance company called, confirming the $3 million policy was void due to fraud and attempted murder, adding insurance fraud to his long list of charges. My brother was charged with arson and assault, but Francine from the DA's office recommended minimal charges, emphasizing he'd saved my life. The judge agreed, probation and community service instead of jail time, acknowledging his actions were justified given the immediate threat. That's when the media found out. Suddenly, our wedding disaster was plastered all over the news. Reporters camped outside my parents' house, calling everyone we knew. We had to hire a publicist just to handle the requests and keep them from following me to medical appointments. The church sent us a bill for $30,000 in damages, but withdrew it immediately once our publicist explained the full story. The priest even called to apologize for not seeing the signs of abuse earlier, and offered free counseling. 3 different wedding guests contacted Detective Lawson, saying they'd seen my fiancé acting weird with my drinks at parties. One bridesmaid broke down crying, admitting she'd noticed my symptoms months ago but had dismissed them as wedding stress. She felt terrible for not saying something sooner. Detective Lawson found my fiancé's laptop. He'd searched mercury poisoning symptoms, and how long before mercury kills, hundreds of times over the past 6 months. He'd also been researching countries that don't extradite to the United States, bookmarking articles about fleeing the country under fake identities. The bank investigation revealed even worse. He'd stolen over $40,000 from my accounts in tiny amounts I never noticed because I was too confused from the poisoning. He'd applied for 5 credit cards in my name, racking up $20,000 in debt, buying expensive things he could sell for cash later. Lawson said each new piece of evidence made the case stronger. With everything they had now, he was looking at 25 years minimum. The pharmacist's friend's lawyer reached out offering a deal. His client would testify against my fiancé for a lighter sentence, arguing he was just an accomplice. I couldn't believe the audacity. Why did he think he could just walk away from helping poison someone? His attempt to run from the police told me he knew exactly how wrong this was. Francine said they'd probably take the deal because his testimony would seal the case, even though she wanted both of them to rot in prison. My parents had to change their phone number because reporters wouldn't stop calling. My dad installed security cameras after someone tried to climb over the fence for pictures. The story went viral online, people arguing whether my brother was a hero or a criminal. Though most agreed he'd done the right thing, even if his methods were extreme. My fiancé's family tried to visit him in jail, but he refused, probably knowing they'd figure out he was guilty once they heard all the evidence. His mother sent me a letter through her lawyer, saying I'd ruined her son's life and destroyed their family. I threw it away without reading past the first line. The fire marshal finished his investigation and officially ruled the altar fire a justified emergency action to prevent a murder in progress. This helped my brother's case immensely, showing his actions were necessary and proportional. More evidence kept coming in. Receipts for mercury compounds hidden in my fiancé's storage unit, along with syringes and medical equipment. She even found a draft email he never sent, outlining his plan to make my death look like sudden organ failure from an undiagnosed condition, complete with fake symptoms he claimed I'd been having. 2 weeks later, the hospital set me up with Algra Scott, a counselor who worked with survivors of murder attempts. Her small office filled with plants and tissues made sense once we started talking. Algra asked me to walk through the entire relationship. That's when I started seeing all the red flags I'd missed. How he'd pushed us to move in together too fast, isolated me from friends who didn't like him, and always made me feel crazy when I questioned anything. She explained how abusers work, slowly testing boundaries, making you doubt yourself until you can't trust your own thoughts. The poisoning was just the final horrific step in months of breaking me down mentally. While I was in therapy, my fiancé's family sent another letter through their lawyer that made me shake with pure rage. They weren't sorry for what their son did. They were mad at me for ruining his life by not helping with his gambling debts. His mother actually wrote that if I'd been a better partner and supported him financially, none of this would have happened. They blamed me for driving him to try to kill me. Like I'd forced him to buy mercury and plan my murder for months. The lawyer wanted to set up a meeting to discuss how I could help their family recover from the damage I'd caused them. I threw the letter in the trash and told my lawyer to send them a cease and desist order. 3 weeks after the wedding, Ross Cartwright from the fire marshal's office came to my parents' house with his final report. He'd spent hours interviewing witnesses and reviewing my brother's evidence. His official ruling: my brother's actions were a justified emergency response to prevent an imminent murder. The report specifically noted that with the police chief refusing to act and the final dose about to be administered, setting the fire was the only way to stop the ceremony. This was huge for my brother's defense. Adam Bailey, his lawyer, said this report would likely get most of the charges dropped or reduced to almost nothing. During my next treatment, Dr. Kramer sat down with my latest test results, his face serious. The good news was the mercury levels were dropping and most of it would clear my system. But he explained that mercury causes permanent damage to nerve cells that can't always be fixed. My hands would probably always have a slight tremor, especially when I was tired or stressed. Some cognitive effects might linger too, like trouble concentrating or remembering things. He said I was lucky my brother stopped it when he did, because another few doses would have caused brain damage that couldn't be reversed. The tremor in my hands got worse as he talked, and I realized I'd be carrying proof of what my fiancé did to me for the rest of my life. A month after the wedding, the grand jury met. Francine Price presented everything they'd found. Beyond the attempted murder and poisoning, investigators had discovered my fiancé had stolen my identity to open credit cards and take out loans. He'd forged my signature on documents and created fake email accounts in my name to approve transactions. The grand jury indicted him on 15 different charges, including attempted murder in the first degree, aggravated assault, identity theft, and fraud. His lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal for 15 years, but Francine refused anything less than 25. She told me she wanted him locked up until he was too old to hurt anyone else. My brother came over one evening when my parents were out. We sat on the back porch where we used to play as kids. He finally told me everything about that night. How he'd broken into the apartment, found the journal hidden behind other books. Reading my fiancé's cold notes about my worsening symptoms, calculating how much more mercury I could take, planning exactly how to act after I died. He tried calling me, but my fiancé had blocked his number on my phone without me knowing. Going to the police chief at 2 a.m. was his last hope for legal help. When the chief called my fiancé instead of arresting him, my brother knew he had mere hours before I'd be dead. He bought the gas can at an all-night station and spent the drive to the church trying to think of any other way. Setting the altar on fire was the only thing he could think of that would stop everything completely. We both started crying. I told him I'd never be able to thank him enough for saving my life. 2 months after the wedding, the state police arrested the chief on charges of obstruction of justice and abuse of power. They'd found phone records showing he called my fiancé right after my brother came to him. He'd also destroyed the initial report my brother tried to file and told other officers to ignore any calls about the situation. His 30-year career was over, and he was looking at up to 5 years in prison, though everyone knew he'd probably get less. Watching him in handcuffs on the news felt like a small bit of justice. I went back to work part-time after 3 months, but it was harder than I expected. The mercury had messed with my ability to focus, and I'd lose track of what I was doing halfway through tasks. My hands shook when I tried to type, and I had to take breaks every hour because I got so tired. My boss was really understanding and let me work from home most days with flexible hours. But sitting at my desk trying to concentrate on spreadsheets while my hands trembled made me wonder if I'd ever feel like myself again. The pharmacist's friend facing real prison time finally flipped. His lawyer contacted Francine, offering testimony against my fiancé for a lighter sentence. He had detailed records of every conversation about dosing, timing, and making it look natural. Text messages showed my fiancé asking about drug interactions and whether mercury would show up in a standard autopsy. The pharmacist had even kept notes about my fiancé's plan to inject me with a final concentrated dose on our honeymoon. With his testimony, the case against my fiancé was basically guaranteed. My parents announced they were separating the week before the trial was supposed to start. The stress of everything had simply made problems that were already there impossible to ignore. My mom blamed my dad for pushing me to get married, saying he'd ignored her concerns about my fiancé. My dad blamed her for not seeing the signs of abuse, saying a mother should have noticed her daughter was poisoned. They'd been fighting constantly since the wedding, and finally decided they needed space. Watching my family fall apart because of what my fiancé did to us made me hate him even more than the poisoning itself. Detective Lawson called me the next morning, her voice tight with a fresh discovery. She'd gotten a warrant for my fiancé's credit card records and found monthly payments to a storage facility across town that he'd rented 3 months before we got engaged. The hazmat team found 12 vials of mercury compounds in there, plus syringes already loaded with different doses, and a notebook where he'd written out backup plans if the wedding poisoning didn't work. He'd planned to keep dosing me after we were married, making it look like a chronic illness that would slowly kill me over years while he played the devoted husband caring for his sick wife. The storage unit also had fake medical records he'd created, showing I had a family history of neurological problems, setting up a story for after my death. I threw up when she told me about the children's medicine bottles he'd filled with mercury, planning to leave them around our future house so it would look like an accidental poisoning if anyone got suspicious. My treatments continued for 6 more months, going to the hospital 3 times a week at first, then twice, then finally just once for monitoring. Dr. Kramer ran blood tests every visit, watching my mercury levels slowly drop from the dangerous red zone into yellow, then finally into the safe range. My hair started growing back in patches at first, then more evenly, though it came in thinner and a different texture. The tremors in my hands got better but never completely went away, especially when I was tired or stressed. Some days were worse than others, with headaches that made me want to stay in bed and confusion that made me forget simple things like where I'd put my keys. Dr. Kramer said I was lucky to have survived. Most people with my levels of exposure would have permanent kidney damage or worse. The trial date was set for 8 months after the wedding, giving both sides time to prepare and letting me recover enough to testify. Jury selection alone took 2 weeks because of all the media coverage. Potential jurors admitted they'd already formed opinions after seeing the wedding video that someone had leaked online. The judge had to bring in people from neighboring counties to find anyone who hadn't heard about the burning altar and the hostage situation. Seeing my fiancé in court for the first time since that day made my whole body shake. I had to run to the bathroom to throw up before we even started. He'd lost weight in jail, and his burns had healed into shiny pink scars on his hands and arms. But his eyes were the same cold, calculating stare I'd seen when he held the knife to my throat. I testified for 3 straight days, going through every symptom I'd ignored, every lie I'd believed, every time I trusted him with my life without knowing he was slowly taking it. His lawyer tried to make me look crazy, asking if I'd imagined symptoms or exaggerated them for attention, but the medical records spoke for themselves. She asked why I hadn't noticed my money disappearing or my health declining, trying to make me look stupid or careless. I explained how the mercury made me confused, how he'd convinced me the symptoms were from wedding stress, how he'd isolated me from friends who might have noticed something was wrong. When I described the moment he grabbed the knife and pressed it to my throat, several jurors were visibly upset, and one woman had tears running down her face. My brother took the stand next, still looking guilty about the fire, even though everyone knew he'd saved my life. He broke down completely when the prosecutor showed the journal entries where my fiancé had calculated exactly how much mercury would kill me, with notes like "she's weaker than expected" and "increase morning dose." The courtroom was dead silent except for my brother sobbing as he read aloud the entry from the night before the wedding. "Tomorrow she dies." He testified about finding the evidence, trying to get help from the police, and making the desperate decision to burn the altar when he realized no one would stop the wedding. Even the judge looked affected when my brother described watching me deteriorate for months, seeing the signs but not understanding what they meant until almost too late. The pharmacist testified next as part of his plea deal, looking at the floor the whole time as he admitted to helping plan my murder. He confirmed every detail, showing text messages where my fiancé asked about drug interactions and how to make mercury poisoning look like natural illness. My fiancé stared at him with pure hatred the entire testimony. His hands clenched so tight his knuckles went white. The pharmacist admitted he'd known it was wrong but needed the money my fiancé promised him, and that he provided the specific compounds and dosing schedules. The defense tried to argue temporary insanity, bringing in an expert who talked about financial pressure and mental breaks. But their own witness had to admit that the months of planning, the detailed journal, and the backup plan showed clear premeditation and understanding of right and wrong. The journal entries were especially damaging, showing how he'd tracked my symptoms with scientific precision and adjusted doses based on my reactions. After 5 days of waiting while the jury deliberated, they finally came back. Guilty verdicts on all counts. My fiancé didn't react at all, just stared straight ahead like he'd expected it. But his mother started screaming from the gallery that I'd destroyed their family and ruined her son's life. At sentencing 3 weeks later, I gave my victim impact statement, my voice shaking as I described how he'd stolen my ability to trust anyone, my health, and my sense of safety in my own home. I told the court about the nightmares, the therapy sessions, the days when I couldn't leave my apartment because I was afraid of everyone. The judge listened to everything, then sentenced my fiancé to 35 years in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years, saying it was one of the most calculated and cruel attempted murders he'd seen in 30 years on the bench. 3 weeks after that, the police chief's trial started. I had to watch him sit there in his dress uniform, trying to look dignified, while the prosecutor laid out how he protected his nephew, even after seeing evidence of attempted murder. The chief kept adjusting his tie and staring at the wall behind the judge like he couldn't believe this was happening to him after 30 years in law enforcement. His lawyer tried arguing that he'd just been protecting family and hadn't known the full extent of the plot, but the phone record showed he'd called my fiancé within minutes of my brother coming to him with the journal. The prosecutor showed text messages where the chief told his nephew to handle the situation and warned him that my brother was making waves, which directly led to my fiancé accelerating his timeline to kill me that day. When the verdict came back guilty on obstruction of justice and abuse of power, the chief's wife started crying in the gallery while he just sat there with his jaw clenched. The judge gave him 2 years in state prison, plus permanent loss of his pension and law enforcement certification, saying he'd betrayed the public trust in the worst possible way. The pharmacist's sentencing happened a month later. He looked like he'd aged 10 years since his arrest, his hands shaking as he stood before the judge. He'd cooperated fully with prosecutors, and his testimony had been crucial in convicting my fiancé, which his lawyer kept emphasizing while asking for leniency. The judge acknowledged his cooperation, but said providing poison to kill someone was still attempted murder, regardless of who actually administered it. He got 5 years with possibility of parole in 2, plus permanent loss of his pharmacy license, and in order to pay restitution for all my medical bills which would probably bankrupt him. My brother's community service started that spring, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone. He had to teach fire safety courses at the same community center where we'd taken swimming lessons as kids. He showed up every Saturday morning for 6 months straight, teaching people about controlled burns and emergency responses, making dark jokes about becoming an expert through personal experience. The kids in his classes loved him because he'd act out the demonstrations and make it fun instead of boring, though their parents would whisper about him being that guy who set the church on fire. By summer, I'd started going to a support group for crime victims that met every Tuesday in the basement of the library, sitting in a circle of metal chairs, drinking bad coffee. That's where I met Adam. He was there because his ex-girlfriend had tried to run him over with her car after he'd broken up with her for stealing from his business. He understood why I flinched when people moved too fast, or why I still checked my food for weird smells. He never pushed me to talk about things I wasn't ready to share. We started getting coffee after meetings, then dinner once a week, taking things so slow that it was 3 months before he even held my hand. My parents' divorce papers were filed that fall. They sat me down together to explain that the trauma had just exposed problems that were already there, not caused new ones. Mom had apparently been unhappy for years, and Dad had been ignoring it, and watching their daughter almost die made them realize they were wasting their lives pretending. They were weirdly better as friends than they'd been as spouses, showing up separately to my therapy appointments, but texting each other updates about how I was doing. The 1-year anniversary of the wedding came faster than expected. I spent that day with my brother at his apartment. Both of us avoided talking about it while watching movies and eating takeout. I showed him the latest test results from Dr. Kramer, proving my mercury levels were finally normal, and my liver function had recovered almost completely. He kept a paper on his fridge with a magnet, right next to his fire safety instructor certification that he'd earned after completing all his community service hours. We'd grown closer through this nightmare than we'd ever been as kids, texting every day and having dinner together twice a week. The church called me that winter to say they'd finished rebuilding, and the priest wanted to invite me to a blessing ceremony for the new altar. I thanked them but declined, knowing I'd never be able to walk into that building without smelling gasoline and smoke, or seeing my brother tackle my fiancé into the flames. The priest understood and said he'd pray for my continued healing, which was nice, even though I hadn't been religious since that day. My fiancé's mother sent a letter through her lawyer, saying her son wanted to apologize and explain his actions, hoping for forgiveness before his first parole hearing in 25 years. Adam was at my apartment when it arrived. He took it from my hands before I could even finish reading the return address, walked straight to the kitchen, and dropped it in the trash unopened. I didn't need to hear anything my fiancé had to say, and wouldn't give him the satisfaction of thinking I cared about his apologies or explanations. 2 years after the wedding, Adam and I were cooking dinner at my apartment when he turned off the stove and got down on one knee right there in my tiny kitchen. He didn't have a ring or a speech prepared. He just said he loved me and wanted to spend his life with me if I'd have him. No pressure, no rush. I said yes. I'd learned to trust again through therapy and time, though we both agreed immediately that we'd get married at the courthouse with just immediate family present. My health had mostly recovered by then, though I still got tremors in my hands when I was stressed, and my hair never grew back as thick as it used to. These reminders of what happened didn't define me, but they were part of my story now. Battle scars from surviving someone who'd claimed to love me while slowly poisoning me to death. My brother started teaching those fire safety classes every Tuesday night at the community center, demonstrating proper extinguisher use and evacuation procedures to groups of 20 or 30 people, who probably wondered why the instructor's hands shook when he lit the demonstration fires. The third week, a woman stayed after class to ask him about the scar on his forearm from where burning debris had caught him that night. He told her the whole story while they stacked chairs and swept the floor. She came back the next week with homemade cookies for the class and stayed after again to help clean up, this time asking about his work as a carpenter and whether he'd always been protective of his family. They went for coffee after the 5th class, and within 2 months they were dating, holding hands at family dinners where she'd squeeze his fingers whenever someone mentioned the wedding. I watched them together at Thanksgiving, how she calmed his nervous energy and made him laugh with stories about her kindergarten students, and felt genuine happiness seeing him build something good from the worst night of our lives. 3 years after the wedding, I stood in the state capitol building with a thick folder of evidence, medical records, and testimony from dozens of victims who'd contacted me after our story made national news. The representative from our district introduced the Protective Partners Act, requiring banks to flag suspicious activity in joint accounts, insurance companies to notify both parties of new policies over $50,000, and mandatory reporting for medical professionals who suspect poisoning in domestic situations. The committee asked me questions for 2 hours about detection methods, warning signs, and how my case could have been prevented with proper safeguards. Adam sat in the gallery, taking notes while my brother watched from the back row, both of them there for every hearing and revision until the legislation passed with only 3 dissenting votes. The signing ceremony happened on a Tuesday afternoon, with the governor using 5 different pens to sign his name, giving me the first one in a small wooden box that now sits on our mantel next to our wedding photo from the courthouse. Adam and I had our daughter 14 months later, naming her after my aunt who'd first confirmed the poison that day, though we just call her Annie for short. She came out screaming, with thick dark hair and her father's nose, gripping my finger so tight the nurse joked she'd inherited her uncle's protective instincts. My brother cried when he held her for the first time, whispering promises about keeping her safe that I knew he'd keep because he'd already proven what he'd do for family. We told her age-appropriate versions of the story as she grew, how Uncle saved Mommy from a bad man, but we saved the full details for when she'd be old enough to understand without being scared. My brother took the fire investigator exam 4 years after the wedding, scoring in the top 5% and getting hired by the county immediately. He worked 60-hour weeks studying burn patterns, accelerant traces, and witness statements, becoming the guy other departments called for complicated cases. His reports were so thorough that prosecutors loved getting his cases because convictions were almost guaranteed, and he testified with the same intensity he'd shown that day at the altar. He found his calling in protecting others the way he'd protected me, turning his trauma into purpose that saved other families from losing everything to arson. 5 years after the wedding, I was buying coffee downtown when someone called my name. I turned to find the best man standing there with his own drink and an expression like he'd seen a ghost. He asked if we could sit for a minute and spent 10 minutes apologizing, for hitting my brother, for not seeing the truth sooner, for being part of the group that almost let me die. I told him it wasn't his fault, that my fiancé had fooled everyone, but he shook his head. He said he should have noticed the symptoms, should have questioned the life insurance, should have done something. We didn't exchange numbers or promise to stay in touch, but the conversation gave us both a bit of closure we hadn't known we needed. My mother met her second husband at grief counseling, a widower whose wife had died of actual cancer, not attempted murder disguised as illness. He was patient with her guilt about not protecting me, gentle when she woke up crying from nightmares about that burning altar, and never minded when family dinners included long discussions about the trial or my ongoing health monitoring. Their wedding was tiny, just immediate family in his backyard with a justice of the peace and grocery store cake. But watching her smile again without that haunted look behind her eyes helped heal something in me too. Annie's 5th birthday party was at the park near our house. 30 kids from her preschool running around while parents chatted over juice boxes and pizza. My brother pushed her on the swing while she shrieked with joy. Adam manned the grill, flipping burgers for the adults, and both my parents sat at a picnic table, peacefully discussing vacation plans with my mother's new husband. This normal moment with chocolate cake and party games and kids arguing over toys felt like the greatest victory after everything we'd survived. 10 years have passed since that burning altar and the knife at my throat. Days go by now where I don't think about it at all. I'm too busy with Annie's school projects and Adam's promotion, and my brother's engagement party, and my mother's garden club fundraiser. My tremor only shows up during extreme stress. My hair grew back thicker than before, thanks to some expensive treatments, and the scar on my throat faded to a thin white line that most people don't even notice. My life is full of people who actually want me alive and happy, and honestly that turns out to be everything I ever really needed.